I didn't cry at my father's funeral. People noticed. They whispered. They thought I was cold, heartless, ungrateful. What they didn't know was that I had already cried every tear I had left long before that day. Some losses don't shock you. They exhaust you. The real pain didn't come when the coffin was lowered into the ground. It came 3 days later, when I realized my father hadn't just left this world. He had left me out of it. Before I tell you how that happened, you need to understand who I was to him and who I wasn't. My name is Elena Carter. I was 24 years old, living in Columbus, Ohio, when my father, Richard Carter, died unexpectedly from a heart attack. To the outside world, we looked like a normal family, middle class, respectable, Sunday dinners, holiday photos, smiles that looked real enough. But inside that family, roles were assigned early, and mine was always optional. My sister Madeline was everything I wasn't. She was older by 3 years, louder, more confident, and my father's favorite, though no one ever said it out loud. They never had to. You could feel it in the way his voice softened when she spoke to her, in the way he listened when she talked, in the way her mistakes were forgiven, while mine were remembered forever. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who helped Dad with paperwork when Mom left, the one who stayed late at the office without pay, the one who believed loyalty mattered more than recognition. I truly believed that one day, that loyalty would mean something. When my father died, I was the one who handled everything. The hospital calls, the funeral arrangements, the paperwork. Madeline cried dramatically, leaning into relatives, while I stood in the background, holding everything together. People praised me. "You're so strong," they said. "You're such a good daughter." I didn't know then that strength in my family was never rewarded. 3 days after the funeral, we sat in a small lawyer's office. The air smelled like old paper and cheap coffee, the kind of place where life-changing news is delivered in the most boring way possible. Madeline sat beside me, scrolling on her phone, calm and distracted. I remember thinking how strange it was, how quickly she seemed to move on. The lawyer cleared his throat and opened the folder. According to Richard Carter's will, I held my breath. His primary cash inheritance of $5,000 is to be given to his eldest daughter, Madeline Carter. I turned toward my sister instinctively. She looked up, surprised, then smiled, not at me, at the number. The lawyer continued speaking, flipping pages. I waited and waited. My name never came. No property, no savings, no business interest, no letter, no explanation. Finally, I spoke. My voice didn't even sound like it belonged to me. "Excuse me," I said softly. Is that everything?" The lawyer looked at me, confused. "Yes, that concludes the inheritance." The room went silent. I felt something crack inside my chest, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet break, like glass under pressure. "So," I whispered, "I get nothing." The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "There is no allocation listed for you." Madeline didn't say a word. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look guilty. She just leaned back in her chair and crossed her legs. That's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. On the drive home, the silence was unbearable. The city lights blurred as tears finally filled my eyes. "Did you know?" I asked her. She didn't answer immediately. Then she sighed. "Dad said you'd understand." That sentence destroyed something in me forever. Understand what? That I was worth nothing? That my years of loyalty were invisible? That love in our family had a price tag, and mine was zero? When we reached the house, the same house I had helped pay for, Madeline casually mentioned she'd be using the money for a vacation. A vacation. I went to my room and locked the door. I sat on the floor, back against the bed, shaking. Not just from grief, but from humiliation, from betrayal, from the realization that my father had made a final decision about my worth, and it was nothing. But the truth didn't end there, because what I didn't know, not yet, was that the $5,000 wasn't the real betrayal. the real betrayal was still coming. And it would show me that money wasn't the only thing my family was willing to take from me. For weeks after the lawyer's office, I lived like a ghost inside my own life. I went to work, I smiled when people talked to me, I answered emails, I ate meals I couldn't taste. But inside, something was rotting. Not grief. Grief at least feels honest. This was something uglier. This was the feeling of being erased by the one person whose approval I had chased my entire life. I kept replaying my sister's words in my head. Dad said you'd understand. Understand what? That I didn't matter enough to be remembered? I tried to tell myself there had to be a reason. Maybe my father assumed I was independent. Maybe he trusted me to survive on my own. Maybe the will was old. Maybe he planned to change it. Maybe. But every maybe collapsed under one brutal fact. He had time. My father didn't die instantly. He was hospitalized for 2 days. 2 days where he was conscious. 2 days where he could have asked to see me. 2 days where he could have changed his will. He didn't. That realization followed me everywhere. One evening, about a month after the funeral, I was sorting through old boxes in the basement of the house, the same house Madeline had already started calling hers, even though nothing had been legally transferred yet. I was looking for my birth certificate. What I found instead was a file, a brown envelope, thick with documents, tucked behind old tax folders. My name was written on it in my father's handwriting. My hands started shaking. Inside were bank statements, business contracts, emails printed out, legal drafts, and suddenly the air felt too thin to breathe. My father had owned a small logistics company, Carter Freight Solutions. Nothing flashy, but stable, profitable, and for years I had helped him run it. I handled invoices, client calls, scheduling. I worked there while going to college, unpaid half the time, because family helps family. What the documents showed made my stomach drop. The company hadn't been transferred to my sister. It had been sold 6 months before my father died, sold to a newly formed LLC, owned by Madeline Carter. I sat on the basement floor, surrounded by dust and silence, staring at the proof that my sister hadn't just received money after his death. She had planned everything before it. My father hadn't left me nothing by accident. He had been convinced to. I flipped through the papers faster now, heart pounding. There it was, a signed agreement. My father had sold the company for far less than market value, a family discount, the email said. And beneath that email was another one, from Madeline. Dad, Elena doesn't need to be involved. She'll complicate things. Let me handle it. I felt sick. She didn't just take money. She took my future. That company was supposed to be ours. At least that's what my father had told me countless times. One day you'll run this, he'd said. One day never came. That night I confronted her. She was in the living room, scrolling on her phone, completely relaxed. The $5,000 hadn't changed her life. The company had. I dropped the folder on the table. Her smile disappeared instantly. You went through Dad's things, she snapped. You stole the company, I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. She leaned back, crossing her arms. It wasn't stealing, Dad agreed. Because you pushed him, I said, because you convinced him I was a problem. She laughed, actually laughed. You always were, she said. Too emotional, too moral, too slow. Business doesn't work like that. I stared at her, realizing something terrifying. This wasn't sudden greed. This was who she had always been. You let me work for free, I whispered. You watched me help build it. And, she replied, you should have been smarter. That was the moment the final illusion shattered. My father didn't just favor her. He trusted her more than me. Enough to let her cut me out. Enough to believe her when she said I didn't deserve a place. Enough to die believing I'd understand. I left the house that night with nothing but my bag and my dignity. No inheritance, no business, no family. But something else followed me out the door. Clarity. For the first time in my life, I stopped asking why I wasn't chosen and started asking why I ever waited to be. Because while my sister thought she had won, she had no idea what she'd awakened in me. When I walked out of that house with my bag over my shoulder, I didn't feel brave. I felt empty. No money, no family, no safety net. I moved into a tiny studio apartment on the east side of Columbus, the kind of place where the heater rattles all night and the walls are thin enough to hear your neighbors' lives falling apart. I slept on a mattress on the floor. I ate instant noodles. I cried in the shower so no one could hear me. And still, I survived. For the first time in my life, no one was watching me. No one was comparing me to Madeline. No one was deciding my worth. It was terrifying and freeing. I took a job at a small freight brokerage firm, entry level, low pay, long hours. the kind of job my sister would have laughed at. But what she didn't know was this. I already understood the business. I knew contracts, I knew logistics, I knew client retention, risk management, and margins, not from textbooks, but from years of unpaid labor that had built her success. While Madeline was busy enjoying her win, I was learning something more valuable than inheritance. I was learning leverage. I worked harder than anyone in that office. I stayed late, I asked questions, I absorbed everything. Within 6 months, I was handling accounts others couldn't manage. Within a year, clients were asking for me by name. That's when I heard the first rumor. Carter Freight Solutions was struggling. Madeline had expanded too fast. She chased growth instead of stability. She burned relationships the way she burned bridges, quickly and without regret. Clients were leaving. And where were they going? To competitors, including the company I worked for. One afternoon, my manager called me into his office. "Elena," he said, sliding a file across the desk, "do you recognize these accounts?" I did. They were my father's old clients. He leaned back. "They trust you. They want you managing them." Something inside me settled. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. Over the next year, I rose quietly. No announcements, no drama, just results. I saved money, I invested carefully. I built relationships my sister never bothered to nurture. And then came the email. From Madeline. Subject, "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long time before opening it. She wanted help. Her company was bleeding money. She needed a partner, someone who understood the business. The audacity almost made me laugh. We met at a cafe downtown. She looked different, thinner, tired, less sure of herself. "You look good," she said awkwardly. "Thanks," I replied. "So what do you want?" She hesitated. I might have underestimated how hard this would be alone. I waited. "I thought maybe," she continued, "we could work together again. Like before." Like before. When I worked for free. When my loyalty was exploited. When I was erased. I smiled politely. "No," I said. Her face hardened. "You're still angry?" "No," I replied honestly. "I'm finished." She scoffed. "You wouldn't even be here without Dad's company." I leaned forward. "And you wouldn't have one without me." That's when she realized. I wasn't the same sister she'd stepped over. I stood up, paid for my coffee, and left. 6 months later, Carter Freight Solutions filed for bankruptcy. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just kept building. By the time I turned 27, I co-founded my own logistics consulting firm. Small, focused, ethical, profitable. My name was on the door. Not Carter. Mine. One evening, I visited my father's grave. I hadn't gone since the funeral. "I don't hate you," I said quietly, "but I won't excuse you either." I realized then that inheritance isn't just money, it's belief. And he had given his belief to the wrong child. But that didn't mean I was empty-handed, because I inherited something else. Resilience, clarity, self-respect. My sister got $5,000. I got the truth. And in the end, that truth made me unstoppable.